How's it going? You guys all move your cars? Yeah? No, whatever, it doesn't matter. Great to be here talking about growth and traction. You guys have had a lot of speakers today talk to you about things like growth hacking and A/B testing, and I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. At Twilio, we're not a company where we're trying to get 1 billion people to download our app, so we've had a little bit of a different trajectory. So the thing I want to talk about today is a little bit different, right? We've always sort of had the notion like A/B testing is great, analytics is great, these are great tools, but if left to their own devices, like A/B testing followed through to perfection will just lead every site to be a porn site. And so, like, you need something more than these tools to help you build your business. And so the thing I want to talk about today is conviction. Picking your own path for the kind of company that you want to build and how you're going to go to market. And I'm going to start with a quick story going back in my entrepreneurial career. So I started my first sort of big company when I was still an undergraduate in college. And started this company that provided free lecture notes for college kids while I was a college kid. I was the target market. I was the customer. I sort of, everything made sense. We didn't have to go do a lot of market research or anything like that because we were the target market. And that's often how many people, start their first companies or many companies, right? And I remember at one point in building that company, we actually raised about $10 million of venture capital, and we hired C people with C's in their titles, and we had a CMO, and he did this whole focus group, and he spent a lot of money on this big focus group to figure out what college students want. And I remember sitting there being like, hey, we're like right here. Like, we're the founders of the company. Like, why did you go do that? Like, we know this market really well, and this is how we've gotten to where we're at. And I thought that was an interesting early take for me of like building something that you care about actually means you can circumvent certain things that people otherwise have to do, like focus groups, if you are the customer that you're trying to go after. So let me tell you about a few mistakes that I've made. So that company was all well and good, a very much a .com story. We grew a lot. We shrank just as fast. We got acquired by a company that was going public and then was bankrupt a few months later. And so typical .com story, but the next thing is what I want to talk about. A friend of mine was the founder of StubHub. And he said, we're going to do that. You guys know StubHub? Yep. So a friend of mine was the founder of StubHub. He said, hey, there's this huge ticketing industry in this whole secondhand ticketing world, and there's no way to sell your tickets, and it's a big market. Will you come join and be the first CTO and help us get this thing off the ground? I said, well, that sounds like an interesting business plan, and sure, I'm just sort of rolling off my first company. Let's go do that. And so I started, and we built this whole thing. We figured out how the product would work, and we built the site, and I recruited the team, and we launched the product, and we're working, maniacally to get this site live and to build this company. And I realized something. I didn't go to a lot of concerts. I didn't go to a lot of sporting events. So in theory, this product was great. A lot of people really liked it. It's just I didn't really give a shit about the product we were building. I wasn't the customer of it. It was just e-commerce of another thing. And when I realized how many hours I was putting in and how my most precious resource was the hours and the days and the years that I have on this planet, and I realized that I wasn't passionate about the product we were building and I'm on the 10th all-nighter or whatever it was, you sort of start to realize that, if you lack conviction for the thing you're building, you can't get through all those hard times, all the blood, sweat, and tears you put into building a company if you don't have that conviction. And so even though the business was going great, I bowed out. I said, you know what, this probably isn't the right thing for me. Then a funny thing happened. One of the first investors from my first company approached me and said, hey, why don't you come out to my summer home in the Hamptons and we'll research and brainstorm and come up with a new business idea. I said, well, that sounds pretty cool. And so I moved out to the Hamptons in the middle of the winter, and we brainstormed. About 1,000 ideas we came up with. About 100 of them were half decent. We wrote 20 business plans. But of all of these technology companies that were interesting and exciting in their own different ways, the one idea that we could all agree on, it was me, a co-founder, and the investor, the one idea we could all agree on was an idea that my co-founder had actually had about a decade earlier. And it was a bricks and mortar retailer for extreme sporting goods. You know, X Games sports, skateboarding, snowboarding, surfing. And the idea was these are huge. They're a $15 billion market growing at 30% a year. And there's no retail presence. There's no REI for these sports. It's all mom and pops, or like the big box, like the Walmarts of the world. And so there needs to be this great experiential physical store that you can go into with a skate park, and you can buy all the stuff, and we can roll up this whole market. It'll be awesome. Now, I don't know if you can tell. I don't look like a surfer. I don't have the finesse of the skateboarding physique. I don't do any of these sports. And so we started this business. And I'm a developer, right? So the way I viewed my job was I was going to build the technology to run an awesome retail business. We started it in 2002, and I said, 2002 with no legacy to deal with, what would the best retail technology look like? We built jukeboxes and all this cool stuff in the store, and we built our own point of sale system and shipping and receiving and automated, order replenishment, all this really cool stuff. And I was sitting in the back room of this skate shop, I'm not joking, building all this software, while there were kids right on the other side of the wall in the store skating everywhere. And how many of you have skated? Right? Kids are grinding the rails, the stairways, we had everything. Everything was designed to be like skatable. And so literally the whole time I'm trying to code, I'm hearing all this like that, like decks hitting the ground. And how many of you are developers? Right? You know what concentration is worth. I came to hate our customers, because they were breaking my flow constantly. And I came to hate our employees, because they would come into the back room where I'm trying to code, and they'd say, hey man, do you know where the size 12 chucks are? And like stuff like that. And I'm like, no, go away, I'm trying to write code here, right? And I realized I'd made the same mistake again. I'd started a company, and I had no conviction for the product we were building. And again, I realized that all the blood, sweat, and tears that go into building a company, I didn't have the conviction to actually put myself through all that pain. So I bowed out. I went to Amazon. I got a job. I got a big boy job. I went to the big company, and I said, you know what? I've started 3 companies at this point in my career. I love being an entrepreneur. One day I want to build a big company, but I have no idea what that looks like, because I haven't ever worked at a big company. I was like, in theory, I know there's these big buildings with a logo at the top of it, and people walk in at 9 and leave at 5. I have no idea what they do all day in those big buildings, because all I'd ever done were startups. So I went to Amazon and learned a bit about how a well-run large company works. And after a period of time, I said, okay, that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, but you know what? My entrepreneurial itch is back. I'm gonna leave and I'm gonna start something again. And I looked at a bunch of ideas, and one of the things that I realized was that at every one of my previous companies, at one point or another, we had needed communications to build the product, build the company, build the experience that we were trying to achieve. I'm not talking about a desk phone on every employee's desk. I mean like communications as a part of the experience of the company, a critical part of the workflows or how we interacted with customers or something like that. And every time when we went and talked to the communications industry, and they said, yeah, sure, we can help you out with that, right? First, you're going to run all these lines from the carriers to your data center, and then you're going to rack up all this telco gear, and then you're going to put this software application on top and bring in professional services, and that'll be $3 million in 24 months. And I'm a software person. Software people iterate constantly, listen to customers, keep the backlog, and sprint after sprint after sprint. And I said, it's insane to do a project that's going to be 2 years long, right? It's waterfall all over again. This isn't how software people work. We're about iteration. And so we started Twilio to provide communications for developers and to bring communications into the age of software. And there was a funny thing that happened along the way. See, when I was an undergraduate in the mid-90s, I was taking my computer science courses, and I'm learning how to do sort algorithms in C, a lot of fun. But that was boring. Like what I really wanted to do was to program things for this brand new thing called the internet. I wanted to build web applications. And so how do you do that? Well, you need an application server. So what did I do? Like any broke college student would do, I bootlegged a copy of the most popular app server of the day, Cold Fusion. Downloaded my copy, went on the whereas boards, found serial numbers, found one that worked, and that's how I learned to write apps for the web, on my stolen copy of Cold Fusion. A few years later, I'm the first CTO of StubHub, and guess what tool I brought in to build StubHub? The one that I knew, Cold Fusion. And StubHub is suddenly scaling, and we buy probably 10,000 copies of Cold Fusion to power StubHub. And so it showed me the power very early on in my life of the tools that a developer knows that they then bring into business can be very influential in the buying process of that company. Because if the developer knows the tool, brings it, and it solves a problem, the business is going to pay a lot for that solution over time. And so we started Twilio with this observation that developers represent a big buying opportunity, and communications is an unmet need. And so we had this hypothesis, first from my own experiences, buying Cold Fusion, or stealing Cold Fusion, then buying Cold Fusion. And then from needing communications, multiple companies in a row, and there being no solution that made any sense to us software people. And so what I did is I went around and asked people who were in the target market for what I was building, whether or not they thought it was interesting. And I'd done this multiple times with multiple ideas I've had over the years. I had an idea for a BitTorrent-based cable company, which actually someone went and started. So I had this idea for a BitTorrent-based cable company at one point. And I went around to people who are potential customers of it, right? People who watch maybe TV. And I'd say something like, hey, I have this idea. You could have a box and you could watch TV, but it'd be free. You don't have to pay a monthly fee to the cable company. What would you think of that? And I got this response pretty much every time. They'd say, huh, that's interesting. How about them Yankees? And they just sort of change the topic in a sort of awkward way. And I'd say, oh, okay, I'd just sort of make note, like, okay, it didn't really give a spark or anything. And you talk to enough people and you get that response enough, you say, okay, well, maybe this isn't a very good idea because my early research with customers, they're not getting excited. But when I talk to developers about Twilio and I'd say, hey, I have this idea, right? We're going to have this web service, you make an API call and you can make phones ring and send text messages. Here's what happened. A developer would say, huh, that's interesting. How about them Yankees? And I'd say, oh man, I guess it's not a good idea, right? But then a funny thing would happen. About a minute or two later, they'd say, hey, wait a minute, back to that thing you were talking about with the phones. Could I use it to, alert people when their package ships? And I'd say, yes, you could. Oh, that's really interesting. And I'd see the gears start turning. And I'd see that this had hit they were thinking about it a lot, and they were coming up with use cases. And when I saw that happen multiple times, that gave me the conviction to quit everything I was working on and just do this full time. So we started the company, wrote the prototype, went back to a bunch of those customers, or friends, basically, and I said, hey, remember that thing I talked about, a few months ago? Well, I actually have a prototype of it. Would you like to play around with it? And I actually give them access to the API. And they, some of them would play around with it, and they'd build something and, play around and give us some feedback. And we were building. This was the very beginning of 2008. And about midpoint of 2008, we had this very functional, let's call it a beta, with customers who weren't paying us anything. Mostly friends or people who had heard from their friend that oh, they're working on this thing, you should try it out, right? And we had about 50 people in it. And the response was really good. They were really enjoying it. A few of them had built things and taken them to production, even though we told them not to, and had gotten them on blogs like Lifehacker and stuff like that. And we're really enjoying it, and we're doing some really creative things. We said, great, it's time to go raise some money. We didn't even have a bank account at that point. So we went out to go raise money. And we heard something from all of the investors we talked to. We were raising a seed round, and we talked to investors who say, we're building this API for developers to do communications. And the investors all said, oh, that's kind of interesting, but this developer thing, developers don't buy things. Developers aren't an audience. You can't sell anything to developers. Why don't you do this? Go build like a cloud PBX, or go build a cloud call center. And if you're wildly successful with that, then you can add an API. And we sort of said, okay, that's interesting. And they're like, that's what Facebook did. Seemed to work out well for them. And we're like, okay, that's interesting. But you know what? That's not what we want to do. This is not the idea. We have this idea for developers as the customer. And so we went through the midpoint of 2008. We tried to raise money. I literally walked out of one of the top investors in the Bay Area. I walked out of their office where they were about ready to write a check. We did the full partner meeting for the seed round. Full partner meeting, met with all the partners where they make the go, no-go decision. I walked out of their office from that meeting on the day Lehman Brothers collapsed. So they decided not to invest. And we, after 3 months of fundraising, had nothing to show for it. Zero. We had no money in the bank. We didn't have a bank account still. And the three founders, we looked at each other and we said, maybe this was just a bad idea. Maybe this was stupid. Everyone's telling us the idea is stupid. Nobody's given us money. And we weren't working on it for about 9 months with no paychecks. But we actually looked each other in the eyes and we said, you know what? The investors may be saying that, but the customers are saying something else. The customers are saying, this is interesting. They were using it. They were giving us feedback. They were enjoying it. And so we had this oh shit moment. What do we do? None of the investors want to invest. We said, you know what? We plow on. We keep building. We do it the way we want to do it because we believe we're right and we believe we have the customer data that says that we are right. And so we kept moving forward and we got to launch. And we got rid of all of our plans of a grandiose launch. Like, every entrepreneur has this big ideas about a big launch. Well, we gave up those ideas. We said, we're just going to get to launch. And we did. We launched. We raised money from our parents. We had $30,000 in our bank account on the day we launched. And suddenly, the people started coming in. And I remember the first day, we started getting credit card payments. My co-founder said, holy shit, people are actually trusting us with their credit cards. And there's been no magic moment for us ever since. After we had our first month of customers coming in, paying us, using us, Sony became a customer on day 2. Then the investors were suddenly interested. And so my lesson here, the thing I've taken away through all 4 of these companies that I've started, right, 2 that I had conviction for, 2 that I did not, is have conviction. Do your A/B testing. Do your analytics. Write your algorithms that tell you if the button should be blue, green, purple, or gone. But you know what? Have conviction about the product you're building and the customer that you're serving, and let that be your primary guide. Because if you don't have that, if you let algorithms tell you what your product is, one day you'll wake up and you'll say, why the hell am I building this thing? It's not worth it. So have conviction, love your product, love your customers, and then you'll love your job and your life. Thank you. Have a great day.